Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So the U.S. tariffs are now in effect. The reaction here in Canada has been swift and widespread. Here in BC, Premier David Eby announced measures this morning to retaliate, including pulling liquor from red states off BC store shelves. This hour, we'll hear from a mayor of a forest industry town, experts on trade and Canada-U.S. relations, and we're taking your reaction on the open line. What do you make of these tariffs, your reaction, and to Canada's response? Will you be affected? It's an historic day. We welcome your thoughts. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Well, news of the tariffs comes as the BC government prepares to introduce its new budget today. Finance Minister Brenda Bailey will release her budget this afternoon at 1:30, and tariffs will very likely be an overriding theme. Stay tuned here to CBC. We'll bring you special full coverage of the BC budget starting right after BC Today. I'll be joined by UBC political scientist Stuart Prest, and this is Van Color host Mo Amir to break down the BC budget. And CBC's Katie DeRosa will be live from Victoria with all the details. She'll be joined by stakeholders throughout the show. That's coming up on CBC Radio 1, CBC Gem, and CBC's Fast channel. Now, if you're watching us on television right now, just click on the QR code that's on your screen, and that will take you to our live coverage at 1 o'clock. Again, CBC's budget special from 1 to 3 this afternoon. 12:07 now, and in the early hours of the night, the U.S. tariffs on most Canadian goods came into effect. In response, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced retaliatory tariffs of $30 billion worth of American goods. He's also promised $125 billion more will face levies in 3 weeks' time, and more non-tariff measures will come if President Trump doesn't back down. Well, speaking to reporters on Parliament Hill this morning, Trudeau said, quote, "There are no winners in a trade war."
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense. Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake.
Trudeau said President Trump is trying to prompt a, quote, total collapse of the Canadian economy because he thinks it will, quote, make it easier to annex us. Well, here in BC, Premier David Eby echoed that thought. And this morning, Eby said that without doubt, the president's demands around the border were met. But that's not what these tariffs are about.
He wants to make Canada the 51st state. And Canada will never be the 51st state. We didn't ask for this fight that the president has brought to Canada and to British Columbia. But I'll tell you this, we're not going to shrink from it. The president wants to hurt Canadians, if he wants to hurt British Columbians, then we have no choice but to respond in kind to the United States. Our response is pretty straightforward. It's a message to Americans about what this is going to cost them, everything from the cost of pasta to the cost of a home or a car or to turn on the lights or to fill up a tank of gas is going to go up.
That's Premier David Eby speaking this morning. He also said there would be support for businesses and individuals impacted by the tariffs. And we are taking your calls. Will you feel an effect from the U.S. tariffs or retaliatory tariffs from Canada? And what do you think of the fact that tariffs are now in place and in effect? And what do you make of Canada's response? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. One of those industries that is expected to be affected is BC's forestry sector. And this on top of already existing softwood lumber duties and a new anti-dumping levy from the U.S. Department of Commerce. So what does this mean for towns and cities in BC that rely on forestry? And one of them is Merritt. Michael Getz is the mayor of Merritt. Good afternoon, Mayor Getz.
Good afternoon.
Can you tell us what impact this will have on the forestry sector in Merritt?
Well, like you say, the tariffs have been something that have been going on for quite a while with softwood. It's been around for a long time. Merritt, right now, our lumber situation has been a little bit in peril for about a year and a half due to getting permits and stumpage fees. So it has been in a little bit of a free fall. Our mill right now is down to one shift and continues to work that way. This isn't going to help at all. These kind of things trade war never works out for everyone. And I think at this point, making a decision like this, especially after we look at the LA fires and the ability to rebuild that, they're going to need Canadian wood. They simply just do not produce enough of it. You'll also notice this morning the markets were down. So markets were down because there's not confidence in this move. So that gives me a little bit of hope that we will work through this. Cooler heads will prevail, but we as a community will continue to support our lumber because it does employ us here, and it is one of our major employers, and it is something that has been around here for 60, 70 years. So I do meet with the staff and we do talk about situations. Some of our lumber issues, our industry is looking to go to Japanese markets. Some have already done it. Others are looking at that as well. So this will open up the issues to probably look somewhere else. But as a mayor and council, we are working with the last mill we have in this town to see what we can do to help them get through this.
And you're saying that mill is down to one shift.
Yes. It's down to one shift. When I moved here in 1977, we had 5 mills in this town. We are down to one. And that's kind of what's been going on through the country for quite sometimes, especially in BC. So the mills have kind of dropped away. A lot of the mills that were here have moved their operation over to the States. This Aspen Planers is one of the last ones to stay Canadian. It is Canadian-owned, Canadian-built, and they refuse to take their product across the line to the United States. So with that, we will do whatever we can do to support them. And as a community, there's certain situations we can help with, such as taxes, the way taxes are paid or collected. We can work on that as well. So it just becomes a little bit more creative for us.
So what kind of support then? Premier Eby has said that forestry is a priority when it comes to inuring the BC's economy against these tariffs. So what kind of support would you be looking for?
Well, what we would be looking for is, I think, first thing is expanding the markets past just the United States of America. We need to look at other areas to sell our product. We also need to get the permits signed quicker. We also need the stumpage fees to come down. They're very high. So these are the first things that you need to look at. If you're going to help an industry, have a look at what's been hindering the industry for the last, 2, 3 years, 4 years, and stumpage rates is one of them. So that needs to be looked at.
You don't think that will be risky in terms of giving the United States more of that argument that stumpage fees amount to a subsidy?
Again, stumpage fees vary right across this country. I mean, the stumpage fees in Alberta are quite low compared to here. So it might be an unfair advantage, but what are the stumpage rates in California? What are they in Colorado? Like, if you want to throw that and have a look at that, then let's have a look at that. But stumpage rates are quite high. So that's one area that you could start moving in a direction of. And, in a trade war, I think, pretty much anything is open, and, take it to the World Trade Council and see what they have to say.
Michael, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Michael Getz is mayor of Merritt. Mayor Getz, thank you so much for joining us. And we're taking your reaction on the open line. I'm just going to go quickly to a call here before we go to our guest, asking you for your reaction to the U.S. tariffs and to Canada's retaliation. Will you be affected? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. David is calling from Mission. Hi, David. What do you think will be the impact of these tariffs?
Hey, how's it going?
Fine.
So I have the impact of these tariffs. I mean, it's hard to tell. It really is. It's striking a friendly trade war that, in my opinion, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the entire reasoning for this, I would argue, is just a little bit of a misunderstanding about how trade and how taxes work. Because I feel like Trump's overall arcing theory about it would be to subsidize or replace income taxes in the U.S. with these tariffs. And because the American consumer is a superpower within itself, the American consumer is a very strong force that a lot of other countries want. So implementing these tariffs would be sort of like having to buy the privilege to access the consumer market in America. So it makes a little bit of sense from that point, but to the extent of just broad tariffs, I don't think is a very smart thing to do. And the reasoning for it, like the backup reasoning being the fentanyl, there is merit in that. And I know on a lot of these radio networks, everybody will say that there's no merit. It's only 1%.
Right,
But
which is the stat.
America spends $23.5 billion in border security compared to Canada's $2.35 billion, which is actually a decrease from last year.
Okay.
So everybody will say this $1.3 billion plan, and that was actually enacted before all these Trump tariffs came into place and whatnot, and a huge threat.
Right, in December, yeah. David, thank you very much. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your call, and we'll go to some other calls as well. But first, our guest is Werner Antweiler, Associate Professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business. Werner, good to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
I wonder if you can help us just understand the tariffs themselves, because right now there are tariffs upon tariffs upon tariffs, especially if you're talking about lumber, the lumber industry. Can you just parse out what exactly is in effect today, what we can expect when it comes to U.S. tariffs?
Yeah, so there are 25% tariffs on a very, very broad range of goods, except only a 10% tariff on energy. But for lumber in particular, we already have countervailing duties that the United States instituted against Canada and particularly also BC because of allegations of unfair subsidies and low stumpage fees. That said, the new tariffs will be compounded. So we will see that Canadian lumber will be very expensive suddenly in the United States and will very likely freeze out a significant chunk of our market. That means our lumber producer state in BC will be in dire straits, and I can only emphasize how grave the situation is. We're looking at a significant job losses.
Wow. What about other industries, Werner? The BC Salmon Farmers Association issued a statement today saying this is for them going to lead to about 32 to 40% reduction in U.S. demand. And they are the majority of consumers of farmed salmon, leading to a $168 million reduction in the GDP and more than 1,000 jobs. So what other industries are going to be affected?
Yeah, so the agricultural industry more broadly, the fishery certainly, but also other agricultural producers, because these goods are traded across the border. They're fresh. In many instances, they have low transportation costs across the border, but unfortunately, they also have substitutes in the U.S. So when oil prices go up, American shoppers will divert their purchases to goods from either the U.S. or from other markets. So yes, so some markets will suffer more simply because their demand in the United States will react stronger to prices than others. Whereas, for example, for energy, the 10% on energy, that will be passed on pretty quickly to the U.S. consumers. I don't see that their energy demand will go down very quickly. And that has all to do with sort of the economics of these markets. Some react stronger and some react weaker.
What kind of support then would you like to see, or would you recommend, or would be prudent in this case for those industries?
I think we will see some announcement in the budget later today. The government will focus very much on job losses because this will be critical where people lose their jobs because of the trade war with the United States. We need to find ways to help those communities because it's not just the jobs that are lost for the individual, but it's also the effect on the entire community. So the government will need to focus on the hardest hit areas to see what they can do to support these communities and the individuals in those areas together with the federal government.
My guest is Werner Antweiler, an associate professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business. And let's take another call. Your reaction to the U.S. tariffs in effect this morning. And as well this morning, Canada announcing retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods as well. Johnny is calling us from Parksville. Hi, Johnny.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm just so when it comes to this tariff thing, they're real. We got to understand, and I think everyone has to stop changing the language here. They've declared a war on us, and it's designed to harm us. It's designed to break our economy. If you own the economy, that's all you really want to do when you take on a war, and that's what they're doing. So the war has been declared upon us, the same way that the Russians declared war on the Ukrainians. This is no joke. They're going to. This is it. And we all better take heed with that. Now, as far as the tariff goes, I think we need to explain a little more. I mean, every darn time you turn on the news, it's a broadcast. But if we could broadcast some of the truth, being that we talk about a $200 billion subsidy this guy's saying is happening, all that is no damn subsidy. No one's giving us $200 billion. What's happening is they're purchasing $200 billion more than we purchase from them. And I think the news needs to reiterate that a bunch of times, because there's some real fools out there who seem to think that they're actually handing us that chunk of change every year. And it's just the idiocracy that's going into this world is enough already. If we could just start maybe hammering the actual facts out when it comes to the news, that would be helpful to calm things down. But as far as it goes with, I mean, the mills have been breaking them down over and over. With our lumber industry, okay, we do the free trade thing all the time. They get into an argument, they hold it. Last time I remember, and I stopped paying attention, but they collected $2 billion on that on our softwood, and then we won the argument at the court, and they got to keep the damn money. They got to keep the $2 billion.
It's a long.
And then years ago,
Yeah.
we gave grace. We forgave $750 million for an electricity bill to California.
Johnny, I'm just going to.
I get a note.
I'm just going to jump in because I think we're hearing some clicking on your line. My apologies for that, but it is a long-standing dispute over softwood lumber between Canada and the United States. Of course, BC is very much affected by that. And your point about the trade deficit that President Trump refers to as a subsidy. And I do apologize if you're hearing some clicking on the air right now. We are working on that. Thanks for being with us. Werner Antweiler is my guest. I want to ask you about what Canada's retaliation, the tariffs on American goods, more coming, 175 million, unless these tariffs are removed. What effect will that have on Canadian consumers? Won't they make things more expensive?
Well, it's first of all a very measured response. So the $30 billion is looking at goods, whereas the harm to Canadians is more limited because we find substitutes from other producers from within Canada and from third countries. So the idea here is harm reduction, making sure that the message is understood across the border, but isn't going to backfire by making it more difficult for consumers to find goods. Yes, there are many American goods that will be affected. Agricultural goods are first and foremost targeted, everything from poultry and meat to eggs to fruits, vegetable oils, and importantly, wine and beer and liquors, because many of those are coming from the red states. And on top of that, Ontario and BC are both actually implementing separate measures that are essentially stopping imports of those to our provincial liquor boards.
Right.
And that will have a very noticeable resonance in some certain U.S. states. That said, there are also other consumer goods that are targeted, importantly textiles and appliances, everything from ranges, dishwashers, washing machines to vacuum cleaners. And also targeted some other industries that are important in certain, as the Premier called it, red states, such as motorcycles from Harley-Davidson. So there are some very specific industries targeted in certain markets that, well, are not basically big items for Canadians, but they, or in the case of agricultural goods, will have substitutes that we can find as suitable and affordable alternatives.
I see. Okay, so as opposed to broad-based tariffs. Let's take another call here. Your reaction to U.S. tariffs in effect today. Eric is on the line from Lytton. Hi, Eric.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm really incensed about what's going on. I think we should put a 50% export tax on our lumber to make up for the duties that they're getting already. And I'm glad that Trudeau and Zelensky didn't bow and kiss his ring like the Alberta Premier did. And that's all I got to say. I'm just incensed about what's going on.
I hear you, Eric. And I understand you're a former lumber worker yourself.
yes, I worked at Lytton Lumber for 30 years, and we have to stop the shipping raw logs out. I mean, they ship them all the way over to China, and they process them, and then we buy the furniture back over here. Why don't we just give those trees to the mills? I don't understand why they do that. I've been fighting that for 30 years.
That is another longstanding discussion as well when it comes to forestry in BC. Eric, very good to hear from you in Lytton, and I hope you're doing okay there, okay? Thanks so much for the call.
Okay.
As Lytton, of course, having been in the process of rebuilding after the wildfire of a couple of years ago. Let's take, I think we have time for another call here. Tim in Everett. Hi, Tim, calling us from Washington State. Welcome.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I'm on the phone, and I came up with one or two super good ideas.
Okay.
One, I feel it would be a good idea to reduce the tariff down to 15 or 12.5%. And second, I feel it's possible for Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau to get together somewhere to surrender to each other at the same time about this tariff and to make an agreement with compromise.
It's personal as well as political.
Yes.
Yeah. Tim, thank you.
It may be a good idea to have the tariff reduced.
Reduced. And that might be something that's less controversial for Canadians. Tim, thank you so much for the call. Good to hear from you from Washington State. That's Tim from Everett, in fact. I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950. Werner, I just have a couple of minutes, but is there still room for diplomacy or any kind of negotiation here?
Well, there always is. Certainly, the government of Canada is trying to use back channels to reach out to the governors of U.S. states, reach out to reasonable voices in Congress. They all understand that what Trump is doing is harming not only Canada, but it's actually harming the U.S. economy, and the stock market is reflecting that already. So the voices of reasons in Washington, they have trouble reaching the inner circle of the Trump administration, which seems to have bought into those narratives that Trump is spinning on why he's doing these tariffs, which is a mixture of incomprehensible things ranging from the made-up story about the fentanyl crisis, which on the northern border is not an issue, to does he really want to use the revenue to finance tax cuts, or is it really he wants to get Canada to become the 51st state, which of course is never going to happen. So Trump isn't saying what he wants, and that is a problem. He seems to have shielded himself from listening to reasonable voices and inferences, but Canada is certainly working on it. I never give up on diplomacy, and I'm sure the government of Canada sees it the same way.
Werner, thank you so much for making time for us on a very significant day in news and in Canada-U.S. relations. Really appreciate your time and expertise.
My pleasure.
Werner Antweiler is an associate professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business. Mina wrote us an email. The silver lining is it brings us together as Canadians and will bring about the fall of Trump and U.S. power. Thank you very much for that. BC Today at cbc.ca. Lots coming in right now as well. We'll get to them in the next half hour. This is BC Today. A statement coming in now as well from the office of the Premier, and it reiterates what was announced this morning. Effective immediately, BC liquor stores will be pulling all red state liquor products off the shelf and will not order anymore. Here at home, and the government and Crown corporations and health authorities will be buying Canadian first and then U.S. products. This is something we can't do ordinarily because of trade agreements with the U.S. Finally, we're going to make sure support is in place so BC businesses can pivot to global and domestic markets. That statement coming from Premier David Eby's office just in the last few moments. And of course, we'll cover more of this for you. Coming up is our BC budget special at 1 o'clock. That's from 1 to 3 p.m. And the finance minister will deliver her budget at 1:30. And we'll bring that to you live, of course. And in our next half hour, we'll be joined by a former diplomat on what this means for that relationship between two neighbors, the tightest of alliances, and what it means for the future of the Canada-U.S. relationship. And taking your calls still, what's your reaction to the tariffs in effect today? Right now, let's pause for a CBC News update, and here's Amelia John.
Thanks, Michelle. Premier David Eby says BC and the rest of the country are strong enough to weather the storm and the threat to Canada's sovereignty coming from a former friend. Eby took the unusual step of interrupting the budget lockup just hours before the document was to be tabled in the legislature to address how the province will respond after U.S. President Donald Trump imposed those tariffs on Canadian goods. He says BC will again be pulling liquor off of store shelves from so-called red Republican states, and that the government will prioritize purchasing Canadian products first with a focus on provincial goods. And just a note, we will present Finance Minister Brenda Bailey's budget presentation in a live special starting just after 1 o'clock. Meanwhile, the BC Salmon Farmers Association says the U.S. tariffs will place a substantial and unnecessary burden on the sector. It says about 70% of the annual production of BC farm-raised salmon goes to American customers. And the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team is looking into a shooting in Surrey. It happened yesterday around 5:30 p.m. in a parking lot in the Newton neighborhood. Police say one man was killed. And now the BC forecast. Air quality statements in effect for Bulkley Valley, Elk Valley, Lakes District, North Okanagan, and Stewart Nechako. On the north coast, cloudy with a chance of showers today, windy and a high of 8. In the Peace, mainly sunny, high of +4. In the central interior, increasing clouds this afternoon, a high of +5. Highs around 8 with a chance of showers in the West Kootenay, high around 7 in the East Kootenay. In the southern interior, a chance of showers or snow at the higher elevations, high of 8. And for the south coast, chance of showers, highs around 9. And that is your CBC News from Vancouver.
Amelia, thank you very much. A very busy news day.
Thanks, Michelle.
Amelia John in CBC Vancouver's newsroom. We are taking your calls on the open line. Your thoughts on the U.S. tariffs now in effect. And Canada is fighting back with retaliatory tariffs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warning of economic pain. He also called the trade war a dumb thing to do. End quote, while outlining those retaliatory measures. Some more reaction now. The Conservative Party of BC issued a statement as well, and John Rustad, Conservative leader, is introducing a Free Trade and Mobility Within Canada Act. So this is something that he says would make it easier to break down trade barriers between provinces. And so that is a statement from the opposition in BC, Conservative leader John Rustad. Lots of emails coming in. Marnie writes, BC needs to develop secondary industries. Quebec makes beautiful, well-crafted furniture. Where is the well-designed furniture? In BC, a province with so much wood that they export. Jeff writes, in regards to Trump's tariffs, so we need to call it what it is, America's trade war. The U.S. created it, so they should bear the name as well as any other global perceptions it may cause. Hear from Lonnie, who is in the United States. As an American, I wanted to say, please remember that the U.S. is literally nearly divided in half right now, and that half of us stand by you and your country. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for our current government and its actions against you and others. I hope you stand strong and this has a peaceful outcome. And Karen writes, I believe it's a bad idea to add tariffs on U.S. goods coming to Canada. That will just increase our cost of living and have us fall deeper into a recession. Thank you so much. BC Today at cbc.ca. And I want to point you as well to just about under half an hour from now, news of these tariffs, of course, coming today, which is also BC Budget Day. And Finance Minister Brenda Bailey will deliver the budget this afternoon. That will likely be a lot about tariffs, and so we'll bring you special coverage of that at 1 o'clock right after BC Today. I'll be joined by Stuart Prest and Mo Amir to break it down. CBC reporter Katie DeRosa will be live from Victoria with various stakeholders as well. So that's live on CBC Radio, CBC Gem, and CBC's Fast Channel. On television right now, you can see a QR code and just click on that code. That will take you right to our live coverage starting at 1 o'clock. More on the tariffs. And as I mentioned, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau went so far as to call the tariffs a dumb trade war designed to collapse the Canadian economy. Here's more of what he had to say.
Canadians are hurt. Canadians are angry. We're going to choose to not go on vacation in Florida or Old Orchard Beach or wherever. We're going to choose to try to buy Canadian products and forego bourbon and other classic American products. And yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem. But let me tell Americans, we're not booing you. We're not booing your teams. We're not booing your players. We're booing a policy that is designed to hurt us. And we're insulted, and we're angry, but we're Canadian, which means we're going to stand up for each other, we're going to fight, and we're going to win.
Joining me now is Colin Robertson, a former Canadian diplomat and a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Colin, thanks so much for making time for us.
Good to be with you, Michelle.
How would you describe this day in Canada-U.S. relations?
Extraordinary. I've been doing Canada-U.S. relations for almost half a century, from the time I joined the Foreign Service and when I was doing graduate work, and I never expected to see this. I was part of the team that negotiated the original Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement and then the NAFTA. I've stayed involved and never thought we'd be in a situation where you had an American president who essentially turns his back on everything his predecessors, Republican and Democrat, have done since before the Second World War, when Franklin Roosevelt and Mackenzie King sat down and created the partnership in terms of both defense and access to each other's markets that have given us mutual security and prosperity.
Someone earlier said, Trudeau and Trump need to talk. One of our callers said that, some of the missives on social media. Justin Trudeau posted today, the U.S. launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. Canadians are reasonable, but we will not back down from a fight. Donald Trump posted, please explain to Governor Trudeau of Canada that when he puts on a retaliatory tariff, a reciprocal tariff will immediately increase by a like amount. So we have now Twitter tit for tat, social media tit for tat. I mean, how does this end?
Well, don't forget, the Prime Minister did make best efforts to go down and met with him at Mar-a-Lago, and all you got in return was insults. And I think, as all the Canadian leadership has realized now, you can't do business with Donald Trump. And so you have to respond, unfortunately, in kind. And Donald Trump only understands strength. If you read his Art of the Deal, his modus operandi is divide and conquer, belittle, and try to take whatever advantage he can through lies and whatever else. And that's what we're seeing, unfortunately. Again, we've never seen a president like this one. So it doesn't matter who our prime minister is. I think you'll find that they'll take similar approach, because Trump is not the kind of normal leader you deal with within the G7 and certainly within the United States.
So as a former diplomat, then, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the international relations given those conditions, those factors?
Well, you try and find as many avenues as you can, which is what our embassy and our ambassador will be doing. And to make the case, what we want to do is, as we did the last time tariffs were imposed, and the last time Donald Trump, during his first administration, threatened to tear up the agreement after 100 days, but we'd worked with members of administration. You had the then Secretary of Agriculture, former governor of Georgia, Sonny Perdue, going in with the Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, a former governor of Texas, and saying, look, this is going to hurt us if you put these tariffs on and if you tear up the NAFTA, because you're going to lose votes in the Midwest where you need them, and in Texas where the refineries are there. So we had a lot of allies, and we continue to have allies. We've just been through a Canada Week in Washington. Premiers, as you know, were all down on 2 weeks ago, and they've been regularly meeting their counterparts. We have to do that on an ongoing basis. What we need now is a permanent campaign to consistently remind Americans why Canada is important to their security and their prosperity. And that's not just the federal government, that really does include the premiers, talking to governor counterparts, legislators going down to state legislator conferences. We have access that no other country has, and we need to take advantage of it. It includes business talking to their clients and their customers and who they source from. It includes ordinary Canadians who go down to the States and just make the point. This is really dumb. That's what the Wall Street Journal says. That's what the Prime Minister correctly said this morning.
I know I'm very tight on time, but do you see a change in the global alliances? What does that picture look like right now?
Well, I think that's correct. As long as Donald Trump is president, I'm afraid we're into uncharted waters, and I think we're going to have to try and, well, we're hosting the G7 this year. I hope that the Prime Minister, with other leaders, and that's already started. The Prime Minister was in London on the weekend at a conference hosted by Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and European leaders. We want to maintain that rules-based order. Donald Trump doesn't believe in it. His best friend seems to be Mr. Putin, who, as the Prime Minister said, is a murderous, lying dictator. That's not where we want to be. But our system, which is pretty fragile, and if you look at world history, it's basically one of empires and dictatorships. What we've experienced this last 80 years has been quite extraordinary, but it's up to us to now, with like-minded, to keep it going.
Colin Robertson, I know you have another interview set up already. Thank you very much for taking time with us.
Thanks, Michelle.
That's Colin Robertson, former Canadian diplomat and a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Let's take more of your calls now. We're asking you this hour on BC Today, what's your reaction to the U.S. tariffs in effect as of today and Canada's response, which involves levies on $30 billion of U.S. goods? More to come, the Prime Minister says, in 3 weeks if those tariffs are not revoked. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Lots of emails are coming in to bctoday@cbc.ca. Right now, let's go back to the phone lines. And we actually have a call from Ontario, and Stephanie is joining us from Oshawa. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi.
We've been hearing from your premier quite a bit today as well. Tell us what your thoughts are on the tariffs.
Well, I used to be a supporter of Trump, but now I don't trust him. Because he said to us the reason why he was putting tariffs on Canada was to protect the border, stop the illegal crossing, and the fentanyl problem. We did what he asks, and he still decided to now put tariffs on us. So from that point in time, I don't trust him anymore. I don't believe he is, like he says, a president for peace. And on top of it, he's talking about Ukraine's president disrespecting him in the Oval Office, yet he continues calling our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, the 51st governor. That's very disrespectful.
Stephanie, thank you so much for calling. I hope you have a good day there in Ontario. Seth is joining us back here in BC from Dunster. Hi, Seth.
Hello, how are you?
I am just fine. Thanks for calling in. What's your reaction to the U.S. tariffs and the counter tariffs from Canada?
Well, the latter, I think, is the best we can do. I think we should do more. Honestly, I have to applaud our leaders, specifically Justin Trudeau and David Eby, for their strong stance on this. You can't really negotiate with a fascist like Trump or his backers. We need to really focus on taking care of our own here in Canada, and that includes value-added industry. I myself have been in the forest industry for 35 years. My kids are in it, and I hope my grandkids will be too. Right now, standing at my sawmill, trying to make products for our little value-added mill bark in McBride, BC, and we need to be doing a lot more of this. We probably should have for a long time ago.
What do you make, Seth?
Well, I'm making lumber right now. So it goes to our production plant, and we make all kinds of products from doors to trim to lumber to everything you can imagine, really. Yeah. But it's always hard to compete with international markets, and this whole international trade that we have set up right now has really bit us in the ass, if you don't mind me saying. But,
And,
so I think.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Seth.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking that, forestry does have this, very specific concern. It has been singled out by the Premier as an industry of concern. And when you hear we need to diversify even more, look for other markets, another caller earlier said we need to look toward Japan. How easy is that going to be for companies like what you work for?
Well, I mean, for myself, I'm pretty small scale. Most of my time in the forest industry has been as a silviculture contractor, so I do surveys and I employ a lot of tree planters. But there's going to be fall down. As the clients I work for, have reduced sales to the States and reduced exports because of the tariffs. That's going to affect us absolutely. They're going to be trying to plant less trees or drive the price down, which we need to reforest, especially after the catastrophic wildfires caused by climate change. I mean, as far as export goes, yes, we do need other partners in the short term. But one thing Canada has never been very good at since maybe before the Second World War is looking after our own needs domestically. We need to remove interprovincial trade barriers. We need to really, really focus on value-added industry here in the country so that we can be selling to each other instead of selling our raw products and then buying them back as finished. It's absurd.
It's a theme I've heard, Seth, from other callers. Thank you very much. Really good to hear from you. Appreciate hearing your personal perspective on this. That's Seth in Dunster. Mohammed is on the line from Victoria. Hi, Mohammed. What's your reaction to the tariffs in place today?
Hi. As the last caller said, Trump is a fascist, which is totally true. He admires people like Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, the dictators of the world. He wants control of the world, and this is what he's trying to do with Canada as a starting point. He's talked about taking over Greenland, about the Panama Canal, and God knows where else. And this is something that the rest of the world needs to stand up and start fighting back against the U.S. The U.S. has been a great power for many years, but they've also done tremendous and horrible things. And all this nonsense about his tariffs and accusing Canada and Mexico of bringing in tons of drugs and immigrants crossing the borders and so on. Why are we doing his dirty work? Why are they not patrolling their own borders so that they can prevent people from coming in? And I mean, and their own data shows that when it comes to fentanyl and drugs, it's the other way around, and that's the U.S. data. So why are we doing his dirty work for him instead of him doing it for himself? Why is he penalizing Canada and Mexico? So I think that this is all ass backwards. And then my other issues with the premiers of this country is we had a problem during COVID with supply chain. Why have they sat on their asses not doing anything about this?
I'm gonna, Mohammed, thank you very much. Really appreciate your call. That's Mohammed in Victoria. Heard that word 3 times in this program. Let's hear now from the opposition leader here in Canada. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre spoke this morning.
You might have noticed that your company has already been moving jobs to the United States as greedy and self-serving CEOs put their share prices ahead of your job. And $500 billion net has left from Canada to Trump's America under the current Liberal government. And now this. But I'm here with a message of hope. We will overcome this attack on our economy, and I have a plan to do it. First, we must retaliate, targeting American goods in the following order. A, goods that we can make ourselves. B, goods we don't need. And C, goods we can get from elsewhere. Second, counter tariffs must not be a cash cow for the government. Almost every penny of the tariffs collected should go to tax cuts, with a small sum set aside for targeted relief to workers hardest hit by the trade war. None of the money should go to new government spending and programs. We must not allow politicians to dishonestly use this crisis to once again launch a debt-fueled, money-printing spending spree that will drive up inflation and further destroy the working class and hit the poorest people the hardest.
That is Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre speaking this morning. Let's go back to some of your calls now and asking for your reaction to the U.S. tariffs in effect today, as Canada as well responds with levies on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods. And Craig is calling us from Sicamous. Hi, Craig.
I'm close and staying that way. Good day. Hello?
Yes, hi there. You're on the line. You're on the air.
Okay, great. We're about to get a triple whammy, actually. The first one is Donald's tariffs. That's going to hurt all of our producers. The second is going to be Trudeau's retaliatory tariffs. That's going to tax the people that are no longer working. And don't forget that come April 1st, we're going to have a 20% increase on the carbon tax. Bang, bang, bang. These people are not thinking.
What impact will that have on cost of living? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do not use retaliatory tariffs. The first thing you should do is eliminate the carbon tax. That would allow the producers to maintain their staff, the transportation, the wholesalers, the retailers, and at the end, the consumer would be able to buy Canadian.
Craig,
why are we shooting ourselves in the foot?
Okay, Craig, thank you so much for that. That's Craig in Sicamous. Mike actually wrote us as well. The U.S. tariffs on Canada are bad enough, but the counter tariffs will be crippling. I work in the beverage industry, and aluminum cans come from either the U.S. or China. There are no Canadian options. I think Canada and Mexico need to just stop selling big ticket items to the U.S. for a while, like food, energy, lumber, minerals, pharmaceuticals. Maybe then Donald Trump will remove them altogether. The tariffs, I think, is what he's referring to there. Mike concludes by saying these are weird times. Yeah, there's a headline there for you. Mike, thank you so much. bctoday@cbc.ca is, again, our email address. Graham is our next caller now in Victoria. Hi, Graham. Your reaction to the tariffs?
Oh, all sorts. I hope you can hear me reasonably well.
We sure can, yeah.
Great. So, as was posted in the CBC, I'm not sure whether I'm correctly attributing it to William Buffett or somebody else.
To Warren Buffett?
This is war.
Mm-hmm.
Warren Buffett, thank you. This is war. War hurts. It'll hurt business. It'll hurt people. So let's forget the tariffs. And for anything that might impact our people, such as a 25% tariff put on U.S., let's just reduce our exports by an equivalent amount. So reduce our exports by 25%. And, continue on with defending ourselves. Mohammed said we're ass backwards because we're defending our enemy rather than because that's not exfiltrating defense. There's nothing about guns coming into Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And he built a wall and tried to charge it to Mexico. Well, that didn't work. So now we have a wall of tariff.
Okay, so making that
Mexico and Canada.
That metaphor there. Graham, thank you very much. You can certainly hear, I think, just how personal this is becoming for people with that strong language. I note that there is some strong language on this program today. I suppose it is a result of how strongly and personally people are feeling and taking this news, and significant news, of course, today. Rhonda is our next caller now in Parksville. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi. So there's been a couple of callers that have been talking about forestry,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, so I agree with what they're saying, but it was just briefly mentioned, I think, about the banning raw log exports. So I wouldn't call it a counter tariff, just a countermeasure. So being that tariff is on lumber, softwood lumber, and there has been one anyway, but now more, And being that companies like Interfor are moving down to southern United States, where it's tree farms, and they've run out of the trees that are easily accessible. I think the best thing for the forest industry right now, and all of us, is to ban the raw logs, because when we stop shipping our raw resource to them to keep their people working, they will have to buy our lumber. So we need to do that. And there's so many people I've been talking to from all walks of life who keep saying, yes, we need to ban the raw log exports.
Rhonda, thank you very much. It's interesting to hear as well in Ontario, Doug Ford talking there about electricity, which is what they export quite a bit of to American states south of the border. Our last caller today is Roman in Port Alberni. Hi, Roman.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I am fine. I have about a minute and a half here, but I know that you wanted to ask a question.
Well, I wanted to make a suggestion that you asked us what our reaction is.
Mm-hmm.
Individually, I'm upset. I'm pissed, and that's understandable of all of us. But as a logical voting person, my hope is that regionally, provincially, and nationally, we're gathering up a way to understand what these changes are that are going all around us. The earth shift. It's almost crazy that we're having earthquakes in this time that everything's shifting beneath our feet. But for our leadership, I ask one thing: are you monitoring? Are you learning? And are you readying yourself for this now that it's happening? Can we be prepared for the big one in terms of economic and international trade wars such as this, or the like of disagreements and confrontation? How are you going to protect us as the voting constituents, and how are we going to protect ourselves by voting more solidly?
Roman, thank you very much. And those are questions that could be put to the BC provincial government in terms of what's going to be in the budget to take care of the province to weather the storm of a trade war. So we'll bring you live coverage, of course, of the BC budget coming up just after 1 o'clock. And that's a full special coverage of the BC budget right after our program here. Stuart Prest, Moamir will be my guests. And you can join us, of course, right after 1 o'clock.